Many years ago, an African man pulled off one of the boldest frauds the world has ever seen. At first glance, you might think this is just another ordinary scam story. But this was different. From his humble village, he swore to himself that one day he would rise to become one of the wealthiest men alive. That promise led him down a path where, eventually, he crossed paths with a powerful general, a meeting that would change everything. But before that turning point, he had already built a reputation as the king of petty cons. He pretended to be a banker, a diplomat, anything that would get him money he never intended to repay. His scams left behind a trail of enemies, police records, and daring escapes. Jail was never a stranger to him. Yet, every time he was caught, he found a way out, and in the most outrageous ways imaginable. Once, he faked a heart attack to avoid prison. On another occasion, he convinced officers to escort him to the bank so he could withdraw funds for medical bills, only to disappear through a hole beneath a latrine. A true escape artist, he treated confinement as nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. It was during one of these stints in jail that he secured the fateful meeting with the general, the beginning of his grandest scheme yet. He introduced himself as the custodian of an imaginary multi-billion-dollar trust fund. Investors from across the globe, Ghana, South Korea, America, Britain, poured their money in, convinced they were buying into a fortune. But every dollar was gone the moment it touched his hands. His scam flourished, fueling the lifestyle he had always dreamed of. That boy from a struggling village was now living like an international playboy, with women at his side, fleets of luxury cars, bodyguards trailing his every move. He felt untouchable. His empire of lies seemed unstoppable. But every scam has an expiration date. Suspicion grew. People began asking questions about the source of his wealth. Soon, whispers turned into investigations. The myth of his untouchable empire began to crack. To understand how one man could sustain a con this massive, you must step back to Ghana's independence era. When colonial powers withdrew, loopholes in regulations left space for opportunists. Some turned to corrupt businesses, fraudulent schemes, and shady dealings with foreign entities. John A. Blaa, the man at the heart of our story, was one of them. He positioned himself as a global player, presenting an elaborate backstory. A medical degree from the University of Pennsylvania, deep family ties to Ghana's elite, even a secret trust fund supposedly created by the country's first president, Kwame Nkrumah. None of it was real, but the story was so convincing that investors around the world fell for it, pouring millions into his hands. In truth, his name was John K. Blaa, born in 1941 into a poor Ghanaian family. As a boy, he hustled to pay for school, selling kerosene and glass bottles on the streets, earning the nickname Kerosene Boy. He was smart, ambitious, and fascinated by the power that money could bring. That drive pushed him far beyond the small life his village offered. Eventually, he found his way to the United States, settling in Philadelphia. There, he fabricated a persona as a medical student at the University of Pennsylvania, following in the footsteps of President Nkrumah. But reality was far less glamorous. He was actually a waiter at the Union League Club, serving and washing dishes. After losing that job, he assumed his roommate's identity and continued the lie, convincing friends and family he was studying at Penn. People believed him, not just because of the story, but because of the confidence and intelligence he carried himself with. Returning to Ghana in 1963, he made bold claims, even alleging a threat against President Nkrumah. For that, he was jailed. But when a coup toppled Nkrumah in 1966, Blaa walked free. Freedom did not tame him. Instead, his ambitions grew. In the 1970s, he rebranded himself again and again. A doctor, a banker, the son of a prominent jurist, even a high-ranking official in the African Development Bank. Each lie brought him more connections, more opportunities to con. But the itch for bigger schemes never left him. He returned to Philadelphia, this time parading as a Ghanaian diplomat on a mission to the United Nations. He stayed at the luxurious Bellevue Stratford Hotel, racking up bills he had no intention of paying. Eventually, the hotel staff exposed his fraud. When the Ghanaian mission refused to cover his $2,700 debt, he was sent to jail once again. This time, however, he was more determined than ever. Prison became his classroom. He studied people, learned from powerful inmates, and built networks that would help him later. No cell could hold him forever. He always found a way out, through wit, boldness, or pure audacity, and then came the pivotal moment. While serving yet another sentence, he managed to secure an audience with Ghana's military dictator, General Achiampong. Facing the general, Blaa boldly claimed to be a lifelong friend of Kwame Nkrumah himself, despite being 2 decades younger. The sheer audacity of that claim was astonishing. But confidence was his greatest weapon, and the general bought into it. And with that, the foundation of one of history's most audacious frauds was laid. The general confided in Blaa a supposed secret, that he had stashed away a staggering fortune, gold bars worth nearly $27 billion, hidden safely in a Swiss bank. According to Blaa, he alone had the power to unlock this wealth and bring it back. There was no proof that Blaa and Nkrumah were ever this close, but Blaa made the tale so convincing that people couldn't help but believe him. And from that seed, his greatest scam was born, the Oman Ghana Trust Fund, a trust that never existed. For a scheme of such scale, secrecy wasn't enough. It needed the illusion of legitimacy, offices, investors, and documents that looked official. Seeing Ghana's collapsing economy, General Achiampong, desperate for solutions, released Blaa from prison and even handed him a diplomatic passport. With that golden ticket, Blaa was free to travel the globe, presenting himself as the custodian of this mythical fortune. Investors lined up in droves. He promised them unimaginable returns if they only helped him unlock the billions. In truth, their money was gone the moment it touched his hands. From Americans alone, he siphoned more than $200 million before the truth began to unravel in the early 1990s. To make his con airtight, Blaa even set up an office, the Bureau of African Affairs and Industrial Development. On the surface, it looked like a legitimate import-export company, a clever front to reel in more victims. Alongside his American partner, Robert Ellis, Blaa lured investors from the U.S., Britain, South Korea, and Ghana itself. Some were wealthy businessmen. Others were lawyers chasing lucrative government contracts. Eventually, even college students and elderly widows were drawn in, all convinced their investments were helping unlock Ghana's secret fortune. He promised returns of 10, 15, even 20 times their initial investment. When deadlines passed, he spun excuses, dangled promises of bigger payoffs, and asked for even more money. Instead of suspicion, the delays seemed to strengthen their faith. It was a cycle, disappointment, followed by renewed hope. One particularly tense chapter unfolded when Blaa invited investors to a meeting in Guernsey. They arrived with heavy coats, luggage, and determination carved into their faces, convinced that this time the payout would finally happen. Yet, beneath their hardened expressions was exhaustion, years of waiting, only to be told the same story again and again. Blaa, ever the showman, arrived in Guernsey ahead of them, settling into a luxury suite at the new La Grande Mer Hotel. His secretary from Philadelphia, Mary Lou Valenote, had flown in earlier to receive the investors. Soon they gathered in his lavish suite, lawyers, businessmen, South Korean financiers, each clinging to hope. There was Walter Hagedu, a sharp businessman from New Jersey, clashing with Peter Rigby, Blaa's associate. British investor Ian Reid, who ran a construction company, sat tense and restless. A Ghanaian police officer assigned to monitor Blaa sipped tea quietly in the corner. And in another corner, a translator whispered updates to the Korean investors. When Blaa finally appeared, dressed casually in a patterned red shirt and light slacks, he greeted his guests warmly, in stark contrast to their stiff, dark suits. He initiated Ghana's national handshake, a shake followed by a snap of the fingers, a gesture that added cultural gravity to his performance. But despite the theatrics, the outcome was always the same. Another delay, another excuse, more promises, and once again no payout. Still, they followed him. Like shadows with no will of their own, the investors trailed him from Guernsey back to London, clinging desperately to explanations they crafted themselves. They speculated that the money was tied up across banks, loaned out and temporarily inaccessible. Some convinced themselves it was merely a matter of obscure financial regulations. They needed to believe. To doubt him was to admit their ruin. Reid, the British investor, grew increasingly agitated, his accent sharpening as he fretted about payrolls and mounting credit card debt. Hagedu, on the other hand, shrugged it off with cold indifference. Meanwhile, Blaa continued to live extravagantly, traveling with his own personal chef who cooked Ghanaian dishes wherever they went. He spent recklessly, never questioned by hotel staff who assumed his wealth was limitless, but his lavish lifestyle and constant delays began to draw more than whispers. Investigators across 3 continents were already circling him and his associate Ellis. Still, incredibly, investors continued to trust him. Some say it was greed, others call it blind faith. But to many, it felt like Blaa had cast a spell, one so powerful that even as doubts crept in, no one dared to walk away. Even as suspicions grew, new investors kept lining up. Some poured in their last savings, desperate to double their money. They never saw it again. But no con lasts forever, and Blaa's empire was about to collapse. The beginning of his downfall came with a failed attempt to defraud Gerard Bank, a now-defunct financial institution. Blaa tried to pass off counterfeit travelers' checks worth $50,000, forged with stolen signatures from an assistant branch manager. When one of his associates attempted to cash them at a Deutsche Bank branch in Germany, the scheme unraveled. Both banks quickly caught on. Blaa fled Philadelphia immediately and never returned, leaving his associate, the branch manager, to face the consequences. Still, his confidence never faltered. He continued to operate between Ghana and London, scamming investors and chasing influence as if he were untouchable. But by 1986, his schemes in Philadelphia finally drew the attention of prosecutors. One furious investor, Barry Ginsberg, a local lawyer, had had enough. He contacted the district attorney's office, triggering the first serious crackdown on Blaa's U.S. operations. That spring, Robert Ellis, Blaa's closest American partner, stood trial before Judge Lynn Abraham, a no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for toughness. Her courtroom was packed wall-to-wall with angry investors, each demanding justice. Prosecutors estimated that at least 300 people in Philadelphia had fallen for the scam, losing a collective $15 million. And that was just the local tally. Globally, Blaa had siphoned off more than $100 million. Astonishingly, many victims still defended him. They convinced themselves the fortune was real, that it was just locked up somewhere in Europe, trapped by red tape and banking laws. Even in the face of betrayal, they clung to the fantasy of easy riches. Judge Abraham, who had studied African history, found the case especially fascinating. She noted that in Ghana's narrative, Kwame Nkrumah was remembered either as a visionary hero or as a corrupt exploiter, and Blaa's tale seemed to straddle that same line of myth and deception. An arrest warrant was issued for Blaa, but he had already disappeared. Ellis, left to face the law, pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 5 to 15 years in prison. Years later, in 1992, Ellis was indicted again for tax evasion. That same year, reports emerged that Blaa had died under house arrest in Accra. Given his history of faked illnesses and staged escapes, few believed it. Only after the FBI demanded fingerprint verification was his death confirmed. Still, rumors persist to this day that the fortune exists, and that Blaa may have hidden it somewhere. His scam had ensnared not only ordinary workers and retirees but also prominent figures. Nightclub owner Ben Palm, and even John Mitchell, the former U.S. Attorney General disgraced in the Watergate scandal. The promise of billions in hidden gold was too irresistible. It was the dream of a lifetime, and it destroyed countless lives. In the end, Blaa's story is more than just a tale of greed. It's a cautionary reminder of how easily ambition can blind us, and how dangerous the hunger for quick money can be. His empire of lies left devastation in its wake, proving that scams don't just drain wallets, they shatter trust, families, and futures. And yet, his name lives on in whispers. Some call him a genius, others a thief. But all agree on one thing: John K. Blaa remains one of history's most extraordinary con men. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe our channel.